CET for their vision in broadening the conversations about research so we can actively engage a concept like publicly engaged scholarship and broaden our collective sense of what faculty can do to conduct research in various ways. And that doesn't happen in a lot of institutions. So I'd just like to thank and congratulate CET for So we're here to talk about publicly engaged scholarship. And although I'm very biased, I believe that we don't have any better person to talk about this issue with us than our guest, Professor Tim Eatman. He was Special Projects Coordinator at the University of Michigan, Kellogg Forum on Higher Education for the Public Good. He was a member of the core leadership team and senior research advisor for the American Commonwealth Project, sponsored by the White House Office of Public Engagement. He was a visiting fellow of the New England Resource Center for Higher Education for Next Generation Engagement Initiative. But what really impresses me, what I find most important about Professor Eatman is that when he was in graduate school, he was the director of 2 church choirs and manager of a jazz band. He's Jimmy and Sabina's godfather. He's Jasmine and Jamila's crazy daddy. And he's Janet's very challenging husband. So I'd like to introduce you to Professor Timothy Eatman.
Good morning. It's not afternoon, right? Not yet. I think it may be a bit of a challenge because the mic is there and I'm here, but I have a large voice. So if it's waning, let me know and I'll speak up some more. I know that the camera folks got me tight. Is that right? Okay, good. It's really a delight to be here and to spend some time. Actually, my first opportunity to be here at the University of Northern Iowa. I want to thank I know you all know him as Meech, but I know him as Shuaib, which is Arabic for brilliant light. I don't know if you've heard that before, but I want to thank him for just being a good friend and brother and colleague. Everybody should be blessed to have a friend like Shuaib. Meech, we've walked a long journey together. Now, having begun in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. So for those of you who think that I'm not acquainted with the open skies and homey rhythms of the Midwest, please know that I'm comfortable here. My family started my family in Champaign-Urbana. We were here for a decade, or there for a decade, and it was a wonderful experience to be there and to understand a little bit more about the U.S., having come from roots in the East, on the East Coast, in Harlem, New York. I thought about what Meech story I would tell you today. There are many of them. And at dinner last night, So and I went over a few of them. But I think I'm just going to spare you. You probably have some of your own that you're able to gather. And then I do want to thank Dr. So Meacham. Oh, we have a mic. I do want to thank Dr. So Meacham for also being a good friend and colleague. Thank you so much. A brilliant mind and a beautiful heart. Yeah. I think of her as an interlocutor. She's been a thought partner with us on our research on publicly engaged scholarships, some of which I'll talk about today. And one of the most astute, ambidextrous researchers that I've ever met. Do y'all know what I mean when I say that? Some people can do qualitative work, and some people can do qualitative work, but very few people can bring those together in terms of, a real meaning-making enterprise, and So is very excellent at that. So I salute you for that work and how I have drawn on it over the years. And then what a wonderful conversation, a breakfast conversation that I had with the CET staff. Dr. Opsel, I believe, is in the room. Where's Kristen? Thank you. And Matthew Green, Dr. Green. It's been wonderful to get to meet them. And Dr. Deflis, Teresa Deflis. We had a real conversation. I thought we could have just stayed there all day, getting into some of the issues that relate to this notion of publicly engaged scholarship and the direction that UNI is taking. Of course, Cindy Yang, as Shuaib has mentioned, as Meech has mentioned, is providing great leadership for the center. And we engaged over Zoom and got a sense of what you were doing with this inaugural event. But she knows that I'm nimble and flexible and delighted to be here. Of course, I would be remiss not to acknowledge my Syracuse friend, Dr. Coley, who's sitting over here. We didn't have a chance to engage as much as we would have wanted to there at Syracuse, but her work on agency and adolescent girls with disabilities is profound and shaping the movement. So we're really excited about that. So UNI has chosen wisely. I should say that, I shouldn't say that. I've tried to get some of your faculty at Syracuse in full disclosure, but they just seem they want to stay here. So anyway, that's all good. You're fortunate and blessed. You know, I was over at the School of Education and saw this sign there outside, and boy, I was excited to just see even the idea of using a gymnasium and a building like that as a temporary space, right? I mean, how many schools of education, you never hear the voices of children, you never see that kind of activity and energy, and it's really powerful. And then I looked more closely, and I said, man, behind the black curtain? You know, they got like some magic going on here, so maybe that's the deal. That's why these folks want to stay involved. So it's wonderful to be here and wonderful to come along inside of a space where you feel resonance and you feel connected. And I'm excited to talk about this notion of publicly engaged scholarship, which really pivot on questions about the relevance and life of the university. We see articles like this. I talk about the slow death of the university. We hear about the crisis of the humanities. We hear about a number of challenges that suggest that the work that we're doing at institutions of higher education is really more about workforce preparation, right, which reduces this notion of scholarship to something foreign to me in terms of what I understood about the institution. You've heard those exchanges and those challenges. And I hope that this, our time together, will be an interactive exchange. So please oblige me right here at the outset. There is an animating question that I want to pose to you. It's here on the screen. What kind of institutions of higher education does a strong democracy need? What kinds of institutions of higher education does a strong democracy need? Please oblige me. Turn to a neighbor, groups of no more than 3, and just share what each other has to say about this question. We're going to do this in under 3 minutes, so please have at it.
What we see outside and, bring it up to kind of so every voice is heard in a kind of higher levels. But still it needs to be really connected still to every voice outside of the university and inside the university.
Represented there, it's a powerful way to share that line, share with a broader audience.
So that's my phone sitting up here with
Oh,
you.
wow.
On
Good.
silence.
Thanks so much for that. Yeah, that's awesome. Right, we got 1 more minute. I didn't see everyone weighing in. I hope everyone will share. You awake? Okay. All right. So let me hear from you. How do you respond to this question? What were some of the kind of burning things that came up as you reflected on this notion? Anyone, please.
We said, thank you. We said that they need to be accessible.
Okay.
And that even for students who make it into higher education because they get student loans or they have some family money, a lot of them, the educational aspects are not as accessible to them as they might be because they're working a lot of hours and that creates stress and less time.
Mm-hmm. So accessible, there are many dimensions of access that we can point to, and it's not just about getting in, right? It's about being facilitated there. I need to hear from Matt.
So I'm going to speak for the undergraduates at my table because they're afraid to talk to a lot of people.
Oh.
Staying from the conversations, I want to hear their thoughts. And one thing that they mentioned that kept coming up was participation and equality, and that there needs to be an equality and promoting equality and people being able to participate in a civil society.
Awesome. So we've got access, we've got participation, we've got equity. Please, a few more. Thanks. This also helps me get my cardio on in the morning.
We said one that values critical thinking and helps students learn how to be critical thinkers to help them be members of society and in their future careers.
Tremendous, tremendous. I know there are two more. Please, Danielle.
So we talked about critically engaging with our schools and communities, but also maintaining our academic freedom so that we're not, for lack of a better word, being co-opted into, I'm thinking specifically of educational reform, that we're engaging critically with schools and communities without being, I guess, used by the Bill Gateses of the world, or agendas that don't suit our needs.
Thank you. Please, give Dr. So Meacham the last word here.
Every voice of the society is heard and addressed and staged. So connecting the gap between street smartness and academia smartness.
Well said, well said. Thank you for obliging me and for jumping right in here. And each of the comments really go to what I would say is an expansive understanding of the power of our institutions and the power of knowledge making. An expansive notion. Knowledge making and scholarship are huge concepts. How silly is it that higher education tends to operate in ways that disdain the complexity and ambiguity of knowledge making by promoting a dominant posture which suggests that knowledge lives primarily or is located in university spaces? Indeed, it does not. Knowledge does not live at the university. There is some knowledge that does, but not all of it. Here's an example of what I call shrinking imagination. We don't only see it in the academy, but it looms in all of the corners of our society. And so I've called this talk, Beware of Shrinking Imagination. I want to argue quickly that one of the greatest challenges of the movement for engaged scholarship is the need for us to rehearse a larger sense of purpose and expanded imagination. We got to resist the impulse to simply copy or conform within traditional academic frameworks This is not to say, and I emphasize here, that traditional standards of scholarship do not apply and are not important or worthy. Is this on? Do you hear me? Okay. I know you're tweeting. I don't want you to tweet that Dr. Eatman said that traditional scholarship is, I'm a scholar, right? I write, publish, right? I love to do that piece of the work. But there's more, colleagues, there's more. We've got to think about how we bring to bear that kind of energy within the academy in ways that are dynamic. Please hear me well when I say that. I am saying that excellent scholarship is just that, excellent. It can take many forms, and we are remiss if we do not maintain an expansive imagination about what it means to generate useful knowledge. Despite all of the classes taught and the degrees conferred, the innovation and progress, tech transfer and patents, despite all of the disciplinary breakthroughs that manifest within the context of our academic work, I believe that shrinking imagination is pervasive. It's in the water and the air of academia. Again, it also shows up powerfully in our larger society as it relates to issues of equity and social justice, some of the issues that you touched on as we had a brief exchange. So during our time, I want to share some examples of how the American educational enterprise and the larger society have been stifled by shrinking imagination, pivoting to examples of expanding imagination, including reflections on Imagining America, Artists and Scholars in Public Life, the consortium that I'm director of, our Genesis story, and situating IA within the context of the movement for engaged scholarship. I will emphasize the power of story in our work. Will you oblige me again? Would you just say that? The power of story.
Story.
All right, I want to emphasize the power of story in our work. Highlight findings from some research that IA is developing about the aspirations and decisions of graduate students and early career scholars. We do well to examine the lives and practices of the emerging citizenry of academia, to be refreshed, inspired, and challenged, to keep expanding our imagination of what is possible. And then I conclude with a very portable conceptualization that's creatively illustrated that I call 5 senses of engagement. In order to manage our penchant for shrinking imagination, we must be vigilant to activate what I call prophetic imagination that interweaves a critical sense of the world as it is with an energizing and hopeful vision of the world as it could be. We need to imagine. We need to dream. We need to do that even in the context of the desperately wicked social ills that we're facing. Here we see the officials toasting the switch of the Flint River water back in April 14. Now we see one of our precious ones being tested for the lead levels that have challenged that community. Langston Hughes, one of my favorite writers, America's best writers, uses poetic dream speak to exemplify the work of prophetic imagining. He writes, "I dream a world where man no other man will scorn, where love will bless the earth and peace its paths adorn. I dream a world where all will know sweet freedom's way, where greed no longer saps the soul, nor avarice blights our day. A world I dream where black or white, wherever race you be, will share the bounties of the earth, and every man is free. Where wretchedness will hang its head and joy like a pearl attends the needs of all mankind. Of such I dream our world. In a world where there are so many seemingly small things, a small sense of being in our politics, xenophobic discourses abound. All kinds of reductive notions of humanity, including excluding people from our borders based on their faith, or building walls, and literally, as I just showed before, poisoning our future. Unspeakable brutality, both initiated by police and, yes, against police. Reductive narratives about higher education. How do we change this narrative? How do we bring to bear within our work and increasing the powerful sense of an expanding imagination? Perhaps some of you have heard of Amy Chua, a Yale law professor who wrote a best-selling but fairly controversial memo titled Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. How many have? Oh, a few, okay. Much critique was brought to bear about the child-rearing principles she espoused in this book. Critics argue that her approaches place a hyper-emphasis on success as conventionally understood, but with little or no regard for happiness, questioning if her outcomes were really successful. Her 2014 book, The Triple Package, How Three Unlikely Traits Explain the Rise and Fall of Cultural Groups in America, extends some of the posits from her first book. She has identified in it very successful American cultural groups, namely Mormons, Cubans, Nigerians, Indians, Chinese, and Jews. In this book, she says that at least 3 critical things uncover the secret to their success. 1, a superiority complex. 2, insecurity. And 3, impulse control. About this idea of superiority complex, Chua notes that Americans are taught that everyone is equal, that no group is superior to another. But remarkably, all of America's most successful groups believe, even though they don't say it out loud, that they are exceptional, chosen, superior in some way. Regarding insecurity, the second point, she offers Americans are taught that self-esteem, feeling good about ourselves, is key to a successful life. But in all of America's most successful groups, people tend to feel insecure, inadequate, that they have to prove themselves. And finally, of impulse control, she says, America today spreads a message of immediate gratification, living for the moment. But all of America's most successful groups cultivate heightened discipline and impulse control. Professor Chua does caution that out of balance, these traits can lead to some serious pathologies, and I agree. While as an educational sociologist, I have serious questions about her research and analysis, if her research and analysis give sufficient attention to the nuanced challenges of systematic discrimination and injustice, I point to her work today not to join her critics. Instead, I raise this here because I wonder if the traits she identifies may be useful to the field of engaged scholarship in general, and publicly engaged scholars in particular. Can these principles help us counteract the pressure for shrinking imagination in education? Superiority complex. We realize that there's something very empowering about the enterprises of using our work in the academy to connect to pressing public problems. Many engaged scholars that I know walk with a commanding sense, if not a superiority complex, about the important role their work plays in the 21st century. Of this second point, insecurity. At the same time, the political context of the Ivory Tower Academy propagates such status hierarchies, battles, and anxieties and insecurities. Probably not here at University of Northern Iowa, but in many other places. One real area of attention is the development of appropriate policies, institutional policies that affirm the value of excellent engaged scholarship. Impulse control. The best of our work is sharp and focused, methodological, but not at the expense of imagination and not defensive or impulsive. We must remember that the dominant metaphor of the academy that is attached to our work literally celebrates being removed from the community. That's true. Our dominant metaphor is literally a solipsistic celebration of being removed from the academy. That's our dominant. That's our metaphor. And we have to recognize that metaphors are meaningful. And they really undergird the ways that we are thinking and working and living out our work in the academy. Perhaps Chua's model leaves something to be desired in this context, but we must cultivate models to strengthen the movement of engaged scholarship for an ever-expanding imagination. I quickly want to reference the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 27. Some of you have seen this article, and I want you to notice how it points to the importance of people having the right to freely participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts and to share in scientific advancements and its benefits. And also protection of the moral and material interests resulting from scientific, literary, or artistic production. I raise that because I believe that as we connect to those universal principles, they really help us with this need to have an expanding imagination about our work. You know that I am faculty co-director of Imagining America, Artists and Scholars in Public Life. This is a national consortium of over 100 colleges and universities that are committed to the civic purposes of higher education through the cultural disciplines, through arts, humanities, and design fields. I want to tell you the story of the founding of Imagining America and its connection to publicly engaged scholarship in an attenuated way. But when I'm in an elevator and I talk about what Imagining America does, I say that we create spaces where spirits and hearts meet minds to generate and sustain deep, impactful knowledge making and healing in the academy. I realize that many academics get quite unnerved when the language of heart and spirit is evoked, and certainly health. But we believe that the important challenge before us is to reconnect us with those really critical notions. Imagining America was born out of the White House Millennium Council, 1999. President Bill Clinton signed an executive order. This order was designed to create space for reflecting on the 20th century. What were the most important moments? They did a time capsule, stuff like that, right? And it was a group of about 20 higher education presidents that said, as we go into the 21st century, as we think about what's important going forward, our institutions of higher education, even in a neoliberal, technocratic environment, must affirm the power of the humanities, of art and design, as an important dimension of the learning of our students. And those 19 presidents had a YOHA, a Year of Humanities and Art, where they demonstrated on each of their campuses in a articulating way the power of the cultural disciplines as it manifested out of their campus vision. One of the reasons why this was so important is because at the same time, or even earlier in the 90s, community engagement entities were springing up around the nation's colleges and universities, right? But these community engagement departments or units were spaces where the arts, humanities, design were invisible. And so IA was founded to address the invisible nature of the humanities, arts, and design in community engagement. Part of that invisibility was a notion that was presented and advanced through most of these community engagement entities that we could come from on high in the university and solve the problems of the community, right? A kind of a one-way perspective, right? These scholars who work with these presidents knew that the arts, humanities, design fields were very powerful tools in actually looking at community-based knowledge and the power that comes from that. And so this reciprocality dynamic that we often talk about in connection with community-engaged scholarship was critical. The second point about illegibility is that many of the artifacts of scholarship that publicly engaged scholars were developing, radio programs, right? Professors of art who are doing public murals, like Judy Baca, who painted the longest mural in the country in Los Angeles, across the Los Angeles River, working with gang members and really helping to bring to bear some kind of community healing. Those artifacts are not easy to count, right? Let's see, one public mural. Right, how do we evaluate that? We know it has some impact, right? But how do we evaluate that? So the sheer illegibility of the scholarship was another dynamic. And again, quickly, I just return to this notion of how illogical it is to think that community engaged, that knowledge lives at the academy. So one of the things that we've had to pay attention to resist the shrinking imagination is to find a way to be mission focused. This takes us back to Professor Chua's idea of exercising impulse control in a context where insecurities and anxieties abound. How do we deal with this vexing challenge of rewarding different kind of scholarship that I can't necessarily, place in a category? Please hear me well. If you ask 10 journal editors what is a publishable journal article, you will get 10 different answers. Again, I told you, don't tweet that I'm against traditional scholarship. I publish, I write, right? But I'm telling you what I know. People call me up, hey, Eatman, do an article for me in a peer review. It's not peer review, it's someone in my network. What about a new assistant professor who doesn't have that network? What about people who are, supporting their own networks under the guise of blind peer review, right? I'm not totally knocking it, but I'm saying we need something richer if we're going to be able to have the knowledge to resonate as we need to, right? We've heard all challenges around, how publicly engaged scholarship diminishes intellectual or methodological rigor, how traditional scholarship already meets these needs. I'm placing here some language from meetings that I've been in, promotion and tenure committees and senates that, talk about that we don't need to create any new categories, we're good. How's that working out for you, right? No. You think I'm just saying something. You think I'm just saying something. I moved to Syracuse as a professor of education from Ann Arbor, Michigan. But I'm also a parent. And we're public school kind of people. You got me? So when I took my queen to the Syracuse School District, and we looked at the progress charts, the achievement charts, and she said, baby, is this upside down? The graduation rate is 47%. Danielle, am I telling the truth? We're patting each other on the back, doctor, grant I got, 3 people read my book, and generations of children are dying. So I don't want you to be confused. I'm not just talking about academic stuff. Literally, Meech will bear me out. And I'm not saying this for your pity. I don't need your pity. I drove 22 16-hour weekends leaving my family in Michigan. I'm a professor of education, can't put my own kids in the school of education, and about to kill myself on the road back and forth trying to be a family man. That's not to disparage Syracuse. I think we have made some advancements, right? But it's the reality. How do we really understand what it means to open up our scholarship in ways that are meaningful, that have traction, that translate into some difference making? What is the message that we get here? Anyone? Come on, y'all, I don't have a lot of time. What's the message? Research is best and more important. What are other messages we get from this? Anyone? Come on, y'all, I don't have a lot of time. Yes. Is service there? It is? Okay. No, it is there. I made the slide, but yeah, she's right. It's like kind of this, really funky, configuration of the importance of it, and honestly, that's not true. There's no university where it's strictly like that, right? There's really powerful messages. But what we're trying to do is say, wait a second, how can we think more critically about a continuum of knowledge creation that helps us see more porous translocation among and between basic research, teaching, and service? How we can look at different types of artifacts of engaged scholarship, right? So don't misunderstand when I talk about primary artifacts of scholarship, I don't mean that they're more important. I mean that they come first, right? When the article comes out, when the book comes out, it's often history. Y'all get that when you get home, right? Often the site revitalization plan, or the mural, or the radio program, or legal brief. These are artifacts of scholarship, and we've got to figure out what it means to really understand and count them. Our work with Imagining America has had us in some deep and engaging conversations nationally and internationally about tenure and promotion issues, particularly as it relates to community-engaged scholarship in the cultural disciplines. And at the end of the day, this notion of changing the culture of academia was the biggest challenge. How, or the biggest priority, how do we change the culture of academia? And so why do we need to do that? Check this out from one of my doc students in the Imagining America. Well, the person now is a professor, philosopher. I'm working on a dissertation in modernist literature and American philosophy and teaching classes like Love in World Literature and American Identity in the World. I know that such classes, as well as my own projects, speak to all of us on a human level, but increasingly, I find that the university is no place for humanity. Well, Tim, that's an outlier, student jaded, probably had a bad advisor. I can tell you, in my travels, and some of you also know, there are these challenges. Here's an engaged environmental anthropologist. I feel starved for working with other scientists who are engaged. So not just the cultural disciplines. I need guidance, advice, and some good people to talk to, right? So it's critical for us to think about the emerging citizenry, the pipeline of academics who are coming into the fray that we can nurture for publicly engaged work. And then just to go back to Syracuse, some of you have seen this. We're not proud of it, right? But it's a problem, highest concentration of poverty among blacks and Hispanics in the nation. And if you look here, you see that Syracuse University's campus housing is right up the street. Am I lying? Right. So how can we be an institution, of higher education and exactly? Well, you've been there. Yes. So right. Okay. So we need to work on that. We need to do something about it. But all this talk, Tim, about publicly engaged scholarship. What is publicly engaged scholarship? I know that you had a brown bag the other day that some very astute presenters laid out all of the fundamentals for you, but perhaps it'll be worth it to just kind of circle back a little bit. Now, don't be afraid. I'm putting up and the light is not good, so it's difficult for you to see this. But this is a concept map that outlines some of the key elements of publicly engaged scholarship. we talk about publicly engaged scholarship urging a continuum of scholarship paradigm, right? It's this idea that we need to be expansive about understanding knowledge making and scholarship. Please, if you want to study poverty in ancient Crete, do that, right? The reason I got a PhD is because someone told me that I could, with agency, locate myself in the realm of knowledge making. I could decide, right? That's why I hate this kind of narrow specialization flavor of the doctorate that to me is just anathema, right? The doctorate is really about an expansive sense of taking your discipline, is this on? You can't be interdisciplinary without having a discipline. Some people skip up, I'm interdisciplinary. What is your discipline? What have you gone deep in on, right? First, right? And then how do we take that and help you locate yourself with agency along this continuum of scholarship? So if you want to study poverty in ancient Crete, and I want to study the implications of poverty in ancient Crete for today, we ought to both be able to play. If you're a chemist who's studying lead paint, right? Yeah. Is there a lead paint problem we're challenged with right now in the state, right? And you want to be a bench chemist, that's all good, right? We need bench chemists. But we also need physicians like that woman, I wish I could call her name, that physician who brought to light the child. I see her as a publicly engaged scholar, right? And so we have to do much better in thinking about the importance of this continuum. It hinges on clear and adaptable definitions, publicly engaged scholarship. So here's Imagining America's definition, which many universities have used. Academic work or scholarly creative activity, integral to a faculty member's academic area. It encompasses different forms of knowledge making about, for, and with diverse publics and communities. Humor me again, please. Can you just say about, for, and with?
About, for, and with.
Yeah, about, for, and with, right? That's tough for us academics, right? This is Dr. Eatman's research question, right? What are you talking about? I set the terms, right? Anybody know the scholar Kathy Davidson? Yeah, so Kathy is doing some amazing work in digital humanities. You gotta get one of her recent books. Now You See Me, what is it called? Now you See Me. Anyway, the point is this. She talks about neuroscience and how we learn and how important it is hear me well, how important it is for the way that we learn that certain neurons atrophy and die. And that helps us. Now you see it. Thank you, brother. And that helps us focus. We got to focus, right? But literally, because we can focus on things like that, there are a lot of things that we miss. Scholars, we have to have a respect for the stuff we miss. We have to have agency about what we can focus on and know, but recognize that, working with community partners, we see stuff that we miss. The concept, Matt, is attention blindness that she addresses, Kathy Davidson. So we need definitions. We need well-articulated criteria. Here's some language from the faculty manual at Syracuse that acknowledges publicly engaged scholarship, and it was part of a reworking of the policy there at Syracuse. I would tell you that story about being a part of the Academic Affairs Committee of the Senate. I don't have time. Suffice it to say that I didn't have white hair before I started on that journey. Publicly engaged scholarship manifests in public good impact, right? Actual public good impact. It depends on democratic practice, mutually reciprocal benefits between and among community partners and government partners. It rejects the exclusivity and sufficiency of the ivory tower, right? We talked about this notion of traditional scholarship as opposed to this notion of engaged scholarship, right? It may include or lead to non-traditional career paths. And in a minute, a quick minute, we're going to talk about some of the research that we have developed that addresses the different types of career paths, some hybrid paths that scholars are taking in their journey. So when we think about the elements of engaged scholarship, we think about the interrelationships among these key, I've written about these key elements of engaged scholarship in several places that I can share with you that certainly you can see online on my web pages. But I think it's important for us to bring that conceptual energy to actually what we're talking about in terms of definitions, in terms of examples of policies. But you know, Bob Bringle, now retired from IUPUI, and I'm blocking on the institution that he's at, I think it's in Minnesota, used to say to me, you know, Eatman, policies don't vote. Some of you will get that when you get home. Policies don't. We got to bring something more to bear if we want to have engaged scholarship to manifest. We've got to bring conversations to bear where people can unpack and understand and critique, right? Different forms of knowledge making that would be perceived as publicly engaged scholarship. It's not a priori like good because it's engaged, right? I mean, how do we bring the sort of critiques, the rigor of research that applies in all cases to bear in this regard? I believe that stories are a really powerful way to help unearth some of those things, right? For us to be able to see how we can bring rupture to some of the normative and entrenched sort of dysfunctions of the academy. And so I want to share with you just a 3-minute video that tells stories of some publicly engaged graduate students and undergraduate students in the Imagining America network. Caitlin Hardy, Danielle Priest, and Afua Boaheni. Do you know Afua, Danielle? Yeah. So Imagining America did this video series that I just share with you that shows their stories.
During the fall of my sophomore year, I started having grand mal seizures out of the blue. I was so gung-ho about being like this perfect student athlete, who does everything and is super involved, and I felt like my identity was stripped down to nothing. I kind of realized that I had to be the one to step up and say okay, I have seizures, I have to deal with all the side effects from the medication. And once I started to stand up for that, other people started to do that too. FACES stands for Facts, Advocacy, and Control of Epileptic Seizures, and our mission now is to change the face of epilepsy.
When I lived in Nepal, I was really, I just received a lot of kindness and generosity from the people that I interacted with, teaching me the language, showing me around, cooking for me. And so when this Nepali population started coming to my hometown, it was really exciting for me to have an opportunity to sort of be on the other side of that a little bit. I was hired by FoodLink, and we sort of got the ball rolling, so it's grown a lot in the past 2 years.
Women teach you the stories of other women so that you know who's come before you. The mission of the Image Initiative really, at our core, is empowerment. If your parents have not gone to school, you don't know what you need to do, right? And so it's we're finding the people that fill in those gaps and say, that's okay. Maybe your parents don't know, but we know. And we'll take the responsibility to do that. And that's what a lot of the women in the organization do. And so I think a sense of identity, what it means, where you come from, is important for them to understand.
A couple months ago, a parent of a young boy with epilepsy that we work with pretty closely in our mentorship program came up to me and she was just like, you helped my son. FACES is kind of a two-way street because not only do I get to be doing things for other people, but this has helped me in ways that I couldn't even have imagined.
There's a man who's been involved with the garden since the first summer, so I thought that he was planning to move further away. And he said, no, I want to move closer to the garden. I would, like the whole area around the garden to be Nepali houses so that we could take care of it and that, this could be our spot.
We had our major youth conference, which is called Sisters Empowering Sisters. Several of the young women came up and they said they wanted to come to the front, and they had written a letter to the entire, the board, thanking us for believing in them, for seeing their worth, of who they are, for doing, people don't do things for them, so for doing this for them. And I don't think I got it until that moment.
So these are some compelling stories from students who are on the pipeline into academia. And in a minute, I want to talk a little bit about some of the research that we are developing so that we can understand better what their needs are so that they can thrive and become activated within the academy. But it's the kind of work that Ernest Boyer talked about when he talked about the scholarship of discovery. He viewed the scholarship of discovery and inquiry as governed by the normative model of scholarship and wrestled with it in ways to open it up. In particular, the assumptive world of the research university was the system that he was trying to make more flexible and more democratic without sacrificing intellectual rigor. See Jean Rice's work and Carrie Ann O'Mara's work in 2006. Boyer's exasperation with the refusal of the system to grant scholarly legitimacy to crucial domains of knowledge making is both powerful and warranted. Nonetheless, in his effort to elevate the story of teaching, for example, to the status of research, Boyer may have reinforced the dominant prestige hierarchy within higher education against which he focused his concept of the new American college, inadvertently strengthening the difficulty of finding a home for emerging forms of engaged scholarship within the academy. In his reflective article on Boyer's notion of the new American college, Dale Cole characterizes the ideology as follows, and I quote, "Perhaps the biggest impediment to the new American college model is the disconnection between faculty rewards and institutional goals. The thinking too often is reduced to the equation institutional reputation equals a prestigious faculty and a professor's prestige equals his or her published research." We know that in order for us to advance what Boyer tried to achieve, we need to know the stories of people who are doing publicly engaged scholarship. And so we talked about mission. I want to turn now to method, and we'll end with momentum. Imagining America's work on tenure and promotion, developed in scholarship in public, knowledge creation, and tenure policy in the engaged university, was really a mixed method study. I think the power of it really was that we had an esteemed group of engaged scholars who, were able to tell their stories. So in it, you see Earl Lewis, right? Who's Earl Lewis? He was the former provost at Emory University. He's now the president of the Mellon Foundation, right? But as a junior scholar, he was working with John Hope Franklin as a historian, right? And Thurgood Marshall to bring to bear stories around civil rights, history around civil rights, research that went even before the Supreme Court. In scholarship in public, you hear Earl Lewis talking about how he would hide his research from his chair because the chair would despair, "Oh, you're wasting time, that engaged stuff, those different forms, if it's not in a peer review article," right? You got people like Devorah Lieberman, now president at University of Laverne, but who was the provost at Wagner College when we did our interview for the study, who talked about wanting to go up for full and talking to her department chair about it, and the department chair looking at the work and saying, well, how does this connect to your dissertation? And she said, well, you know, I've grown. And he said, well, here, you know, the university will be nameless. He said, here, you know, it's got to be a through line. So she said she's going to write an article, Publishing Without Passion for Promotion. In this report are several stories of very esteemed, engaged scholars who tell their own story about their journey in having to hide and, you know, use clandestine measures to navigate the academy. We have Craig Calhoun, is now the director of the London School of Economics, who's a tenure team member. Check out the report if you get a chance. But the report led us to 12 recommendations. Recommendation 8 was support publicly engaged graduate students and junior faculty. And so we developed from that study, that initial study, another one that is looking at the aspirations and decisions of graduate students and early career publicly engaged scholars. And we know that they need to be a part of it in order to really glean from what they're doing. Imagining America has a graduate student network called Publicly Active Graduate Education. It's a national network. Institutions who are members can you know, send students to apply for a fellowship and they become Page Fellows. It's really amazing you know, network. And we started with the Page students and did focus groups so that we could build an instrument that would help us to glean, you know, in a survey context, some of the necessary understandings about, you know, this emerging citizenry of academia. I'm looking at So because I'm mindful of how she helped to analyze some of that data from those surveys so that we could make meaning out of it. But we also had a qualitative dimension of the work where about 60 of those 509 surveyed students and early career publicly engaged scholars shared their story, right? Talked in a narrative way, shared narratives that helped to put us in a position where we could take the data from the survey, connect it with these narrative inquiries and come out with an analysis that would help us have a better picture of engaged scholars, who they are and what their needs are. How do we change graduate programs so that they're more useful to the students who are navigating them? These are charts that show just a breakdown of participants. Suffice it to say, largely white, mostly in the humanities, arts, and design. That makes sense because of our work. But, you know, when they talk about their graduate school experiences, you know, not a whole lot is saying that they feel prepared as publicly engaged scholars to do their work. So what can we do to change graduate programs to assist them? You know, when we ask them about the experiences that shape their interest in engaged scholarship, we see really highly registering graduate work, personal and professional mentorship, community service. So it lets us know we need to pay some attention to these sorts of experiences and curate them in a way that helps us strengthen this emerging citizenry of academia. As you reflect on your life as a publicly engaged scholar, how would you currently define yourselves? Learner. How many academics you know call themselves a learner? Come on, y'all, right? These are different type of people, right? They're thinking in different ways. Researcher is there as well. Scholar, teacher, interdisciplinarian, right? There's some gleanings from the survey. What do you hope to accomplish through your engaged scholarship? And we got really excited about this. Do you see, I realize that it's not as bright here as there, I'm sorry. Expand knowledge, methods, and scholarship in the discipline. Graduate students, you know, 76% said that they were wanting to do that. 78% of early career faculty said that they were interested in doing that, right? But really close behind is what? Expanding knowledge, methods, and scholarship in public, right? So it raises questions about this dichotomy that we have in the academy. Oh no, she's an activist, he's a scholar, you know, the twain shall not meet. And so we've run some path models to see, you know, what can we glean about this dichotomy that is dominant in the academy? Is it really a false dichotomy? And so this research has led us to development of typologies of publicly engaged scholars. And so it's funny, often when I do a workshop and we unpack these profiles, people get excited, no, the cradle to community scholar would, but these are hypothetical, right? They're drawn from the survey and the interviews, but it's a way of, bringing us into conversation about who publicly engaged scholars are and what they need. Profile 3 is a teacher to engaged scholar. And I'm excited about having the opportunity to play, because we played around with doing the research here in a number of different ways. So we find ourselves in a situation where gaining some knowledge about the stories, the pathways, the journeys of these publicly engaged scholars put us in a stronger position, not only for creating graduate programs that are robust, that meet the needs, but also, I've had provosts who want to use, gleanings from the data to write hire letters, right? Because they care about foregrounding publicly engaged scholars in the work. So these emerging typologies are not fully analyzed, but we've been using them in the work, and we really think of it as another way of developing a different type of artifact that can be useful in the academy. We have had a lot of momentum in the field. I really am not as shy about talking about the movement for publicly engaged scholarship as I used to be. I had the great pleasure to be a participant at a White House convening that was called For Democracy's Future, where several institutions were represented, talking about the power of publicly engaged scholarship, presidents of institutions there, exchanging ideas and strategies around how to actually make publicly engaged scholarship resonate more powerfully in their institutions. If you've not seen A Crucible Moment, this is a piece that was commissioned of that council by the U.S. Department of Education, and it's a very, very rich resource. If you're interested about engaged scholarship and some of the challenges and issues that we need to be paying attention to. One other artifact that grew out of that work was a book called Democracy's Education, Public Work Citizenship, and the Future of Colleges and Universities. I have a chapter in that book where I go more into detail on the research that I just talked about a little bit, and a new book that's coming out in April called Publicly Engaged Scholars, Next Generation Engagement and the Future of Higher Education, which I'm honored to have written the foreword for. There's so many other pieces. I'm just sharing with you a few pieces that you can use as you continue the conversations and planning that you're having here or desire to have here at UNI about publicly engaged scholarship. But the momentum is important. One other sort of outgrowth from the White House Millennium Council is a project called Citizen Alum, which I'm really excited about. The founding director of Imagining America, Julie Ellison, who's from the University of Michigan, really is it's her brainchild. And check this out. What are the identities for alumni from universities that are available? they're attached to sports, right? And what else? To your wallet, right? Yeah, right. She's saying, wow, let's make some other identities available. How about doers, not just donors? How do we get alumni, whether they're living in the place where they went to college or they're connected to a college down the street in their town, or they want to be reconnected with the engaged work that they're doing. Many people are part of Rotary, any number of civic organizations. How do we get development officers in the room with community engagement folks? And so Citizen Alum now has about 20 institutions. They have a boot camp where they're sharing the model, where they do the listening projects with their alumni and then develop these profiles, these video profiles that get promoted on the campus. It's a really powerful piece of work. This notion of the shrinking imagination is a real challenge. I don't know about you, but I have to be vigilant so that I don't fall into it, because the pressures are really, really powerful, right? I'm just going to be transparent. The other day I'm at online after hearing about one more black boy getting shot in the street, this time, in the back, and the officer comes and stands, puts his foot on his lifeless, bleeding body. I'm not trying to be dramatic, I'm being descriptive. And I'm at the computer, and I go to the Conceal and Carry website. Me. I'm thinking, man, it's responsible. I need to have, I already sold too. I used to have, I sold them. I told my wife I would sell them, She comes to me, baby, don't go there. Think about our faith. You know what I mean? Shrinking imagination. And I love the fact that I'm a parent, because sometimes our children help us with strategies to avoid the shrinking imagination. This is my daughter. Check her out. So you have this neuroscience major. She's 19. Yeah, I'm bragging. She's a neuroscience major at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia. She just got accepted to a master's program at Morehouse School of Medicine, which she will do concurrently with her bachelor's, who's a dancer and uses the power of the arts to help rupture some of that entrenched way of thinking, of operating, of negotiating, at least that I have, that I know many of us have. We are remiss, colleagues, if we do not understand the power of engaged scholarship, the power of stories to animate our students, like the ones whose stories you saw earlier, like this one, like the ones that you see every day, like the colleagues who are coming up, to be powerfully empowered to do the work of engaged scholarship. Now, I promised you a concept that you could take with you, very portable. Do me a favor. You don't have to hold on to them, but just touch the person next to you. Make sure everybody gets touched in the room. Just touch them. Yeah? Okay, I can see you tweeting now. Dr. Eatman had us touching each other, right? Yeah. This is an example of another set of artifacts of engaged scholarship. I want to salute Nick Suzanis, who did the illustration on this piece. It's my concept, it's his illustration. Nick came out of the Page Network. He's now a professor. Page, Publicly Active Graduate Education, Imagining America, out of Teachers College. Did the first dissertation in comic book form. I'm holding it. He's an educational philosopher. Don't tell me we have to stay in the same mode of thinking about creating scholarship. Let's understand who these young people are and what they want to bring to bear. Oh, it's probably Eatman Press. This is, do me a favor, just read where this is published. I'm not seeing it here. What is that? You see it on the cover page. I don't want y'all to think I'm making it up. Is it there? Where's the press?
Harvard University Press.
Reviewed by the New York Times, the Boston Globe, right? Nick came up to me after a keynote. He's like, I don't know you, but we got to illustrate that concept. I'm like, bro, what are you talking about? It's this notion of what I call senses of engagement. That's why I asked you to touch each other. Right? I'm not talking about disembodied hands, but I'm talking about touching in a powerfully metaphorical way. What are the senses? Like we smell, hear, taste, touch, see. What are the senses of engagement that we bring to our work or that we can? I think that the first one is a sense of hope. We map it to the opposable thumb. Hope makes our work possible. It helps us to grab on to stuff, right? If you don't believe it, you see when Miss Raccoon comes and gets in your trash, right? She got an opposable thumb. Y'all hear? No, maybe that didn't happen here. Okay. The pointer finger I map to what I call a sense of history. I was talking to someone today about history. My colleague here, Cynthia, we're at breakfast. What's her name? No. Chris, yeah, historian, right? The importance of history. A sense of history lets us point back to the past, right? To understand something about the context of how we got here, right? Ask yourself, how many of your teacher ed students know about Brown v. Board? And if they don't, is that a problem for you? Right? But I'm not talking about using history to guilt trip people. I'm talking about understanding, hear me well. Is this on? That the reason that we are where we are is not a mystery. It's not a mystery. It's been planned. That doesn't have to constipate us, but as reasonable adults, as respectful people of goodwill, we can have more humility. They ought to pick themselves up by my grandfather couldn't have a reading card, a library card. Syracuse University, when I went up for tenure, had 2 black men tenured in 106 years. Oh, that makes you special. No, it doesn't. I can go uptown in Harlem, 125th Street now, and gather 50 brothers like myself who could be professors. We have to respectfully trouble the history, hope, history. Point to the past, point to the present, but it also what? Helps us point to the future, our imagination of what can be. The tallest finger is the sense of passion. Yeah. Passion is kind of like oil in the engine of hope. Yeah? But the problem with passion, the older I get, the more I realize, it dissipates. It's not enough to sustain you for the journey. Right? And so we must complement passion with empathy. I'm not just talking about empathy as a word. I'm talking about the empathy that helps us present compelling understandings to our students, whether they're in teacher education or whatever fields, that we all have skin in the game together. That the answer to your family member's cancer could be in the head of a kid in Appalachia. That's the empathy I'm talking about. And finally, they say that the devil is in the details, or the power is in the details, however you want to say it. But the smallest finger is a pinky finger. I call it the sense of planning. Connecting back to our methods. How do we establish strategic methods that help us understand the phenomena around shifting the culture of the academy? How do we bring a sense of planning to our community engaged work with partners where we are just going to mess up because we don't know how it works, right? We're going to make some missteps. But figuring out how to plan in robust and coordinated ways for us to do that work. Hope, history, passion, empathy, and planning. These senses of engagement I share with you in hopes that you might find them useful in your thinking about your engaged scholarship. And I realize I must have gone over a little bit at least, but I appreciate you giving me some attention to share some ideas with you about this work. Thank you very much.